Hello YouTube and welcome back. This is Nico and you're watching Dare to Game. Today we're playing Mount Blade Warband, specifically the World of Ice and Fire mod for that game. Because that's my favorite mod, I decided I'd do some videos for it. So what we're going to be doing in this series is analyzing and ranking the best of each group of soldiers. So for this video, it's going to be heavy cavalry from Westeros. So just factions on the continent of Westeros, nothing from Essos. I'll probably do Essos later. But so what we'll be doing is going through and ranking it with the ranking system I created for these videos. It's going to be a composite score of 5 different factors, some of which coming from their attack stats, the cost it takes for upkeep, the training time, the armor of the individual soldiers, all of that. So it's a multi-factor system, so I think it makes it pretty accurate. So let's just start it off with number 8. Alright, so at number 8 we have the Dragonstone Knights. These are the worst out of all of the Westerosi heavy cavalry units, okay? So, as you can see, even though they're the worst, they're still pretty good soldiers, but yeah, so that's all their stats. Now let's go into some combat. As you can see, they're still pretty impressive with a whole group of them. For each of these, I went around and collected and trained 150 of each troop type. So I hope you appreciate how long that took. But let's talk a little bit about stats here. So for the Dragonstone Knight, they are a level 31 troop, so, you know, pretty dang good. It's, you know, like I said, it's the lowest on this list, but still pretty high. They have a weekly wage of 47 silver stags, so as with all cavalry units, they are a bit expensive to use. Strength of 29, agility of 20, intelligence of 12, charisma 14, so pretty standard. All cavalry units in the game, or at least the top tier ones for each faction, have pretty much the exact same stats. They'll be off by 1 or 2 here and there, but that's pretty much all of them. The Dragonstone Knights have a few weaknesses, one of which being the fact that they don't have armored horses and they have open-faced helmets. So those are 2 weaknesses right there. Where they are okay is one-handed weaponry, like most cavalry units. Unfortunately, they don't rank first with one-handed weaponry. They only have a damage ranking of 234 there, and they actually rank 7th out of all of the cavalry for one-handed damage. But that is the Dragonstone Knights, so let's move on to number 7. So at number 7, we have the Northern Cavalry, one of the few units on this list that won't actually be a knight of some sort. That coming from the fact that the soldiers of the North follow the old gods, or at least most of them, so they don't get anointed to be knights. As you can see, our attributes over here are very similar to the last one, 29, 20, 12, 14. Iron Flesh, Power Strike, Weapon Mastery, Shield, and Riding over here, also pretty standard amongst all of these. The Northern Cavalry does pretty well with the one-handed weapons and pole arms, but since the two-handed weapons, archery, crossbows, and throwing are so low, it has a low average combat score. And the Northern Cavalry comes in at 7th place with the combat score, which leaves them at 115 for their average combat score. So let's see them in battle. So as you can see, like before, they still make a pretty impressive display. Here we are dealing with, I believe this horse type is called a Garen, so they are a bit slower, but they're also a bit tougher. Unfortunately, they're not armored, so they are relatively easy to take down. Much like the Dragonstone Cavalry, the Northern Cavalry have open-faced helmets, Saleh-style helmets, so they are relatively easy to take out with a face shot, and unfortunately also don't have the strongest armor, being really only, you know, strength and boiled leather with a steel gorget. They do have a decent shield, which helps block a lot of arrows, though. Their strong points are they are pretty cheap as far as maintenance goes. They only take 53 silver stags is their weekly wage, but unfortunately their big weak point is they're pretty hard to recruit in large numbers because the North doesn't have many villages to recruit from, just standard in the game, and even when they do, they're usually getting piss-pounded by all the other factions, so they're always looted. But that's the Northern Cavalry at number 7, so let's move on to number 6. So at number 6, we have the Reach Sworn Sword, the highest cavalry unit from the Reach. And as you can imagine, you know, from looking at them, they're pretty decent. We're starting to move into the little bit more overpowered units. Over here, you can see for attributes, again, they're pretty similar, 30, 22, 13, and 15. Nothing too uncommon there. Iron Flesh, Power Strike, Weapon Mastery, Shield, and Riding, all pretty similar, again, getting that 5-5. you know, 9. The power strike's a little bit lower, but that's because the heavy armor and the faceplate on the helmet. Over here for one-handed weapons, we have 255, and polearms we have 172, which is quite a bit lower than many of the other knights or cavalry on this list, so they do suffer quite a bit in polearms. But with that in mind, they do have an average combat score of 119.5, and the weekly wage is 69 silver stags per week. So with all that in mind, let's jump into some combat. Now, I'm a big fan of the Reach Sworn Swords. They are kind of expensive and time-consuming to train them, but they're pretty decent looking, especially, you know, you look at them, they have a nice uniform look. They do have the added benefit of having armored horses, not as armored as some of the other ones in the game, but far more than the previous two on this list. They do well enough on their feet, you know, if you're using them to besiege a castle or something like that, but not as well as many because their crossbow, throwing, and two-handed are all down in the 40 range, so they're not as good or as versatile, you know, close up. But as you can see in the open field, they do overpower most, especially infantry troops. Like I said, their horses are armored, which is a benefit, except for the fact that they are a bit slower, so when pairing them up against lighter cavalry or archers, sometimes they are, you know, a little bit less useful. But yeah, that was number 6. Let's move on to number 5. So at number 5, we have Dorn representing with these Sand Cavalry, and now this one's a little bit different because they are not so much a melee troop, although they do, obviously, you can see over here their one-handed weapons is 241, their two-handed weapons, polearms, everything, their stats are all pretty dang high, making them a very versatile troop. But they also have the added benefit of having much better riding and also faster horses that they ride, which you'll see when we go into combat, and of course archery, and they're really good at it. So although this one does rank at number 5, closer to the middle, they are some of my favorite ones. So let's go into combat and I'll show you why. So you can see that although they do have some light armor, it is obviously, you know, much lighter than the armored ones on this list. But with that, they have greater speed and mobility and maneuverability. In fact, if you've ever gone up against them, you'll know that it's pretty annoying how they like to circle their enemies and shoot from a long distance. But if they're on your team, that's a great advantage. So these ones have a weekly wage of 49 silver stags, so a little bit lower than before. They are a level 32 troop. They have a average combat score of 243.5, but again, like I said, with the versatility, their one-handed is 241, their two-handed is 249, polearms is 250, archery is 236, throwing is 255, and slings are 230. So they're an all-around extremely versatile troop. As you can see, they don't do the head-on charge. Oh boy, they go fast. They don't do the head-on charges so much as they just charge in, fire one volley of arrows, then they circle around and keep shooting from the side. So they're a great troop if you want to diversify your force. I like to employ one charge of heavy cavalry and then have these guys as well. So your main force will charge in, and then these guys will circle around and shoot them. So yeah, that is number 5, the Dornish Sand Cavalry. Let's move on to number 4. So at number 4, we have the Riverlands Knight, the, again, highest cavalry troop for the Riverlands. Again, like I said before, the attributes are pretty much basic across them. The Riverlands Knight is another one where we have a really versatile troop. Yes, they have a really high one-handed and polearms, you know, damage or whatever level, but the other ones, except for crossbows, are all also really high. So again, that shows the versatility they have on horseback or on the ground, and they're great for that. But like before, the perks are pretty much the same. Iron Flesh 9, Power Strike 7, Weapon Mastery of 9, and then Shield and Riding are 5. So pretty basic there. Let's go into combat and see these guys in action. So basically only 2 weaknesses for these troops, and that would be the unarmored horses, and I believe these are Garens, so they're the lighter war horses, but still nice and fast. But they are unarmored, so they're relatively easy to take down with arrows. And also, the Riverlands have pretty bad armor as far as the soldiers themselves go. Pretty light armor on the chest and everything, and then the head isn't even helmet, it's just a chainmail coif. It does offer them maneuverability and speed, but of course reduced defensive damage. They have a pretty high one-handed again, pretty close to the top actually with 279, and decent for polearms as well for 264, even though I don't see any lances or anything. But yeah, they are decent troops in and itself, and I was very surprised to find them ranking this high on my list. But yeah, that's number 4 with the Riverlands Knight. Let's go on to number 3. So here at number 3, we're in the top 3 now, we have the Stormlands House Knight, one of the best, or at least coolest looking knights in the game. I just really like their outfit. Anyway, they are a level 39 troop, as you can see up here, so pretty darn high. They do have a weekly wage of 72 silver stags, so pretty expensive already. As you can see, attributes are pretty much the same, so are the stats. Over here we have another one where they're pretty one-sided. These are clearly, you know, knights. That's what their training was. So their one-handed weapons and their pole arms are very high, and their other stats are relatively low. So let's take a peek at them in combat. The Stormlands House Knight does have light armor. They just have a caparison, I believe that's called, a padded caparison, which does offer them decent resistance. So if you're going against lower level archers, it might even take 2 or 3 arrows to take one of these horses down. The Stormlands Knights do seem to randomly, it's not every single one of them, but they do equip them with banners, so they are able to use them as pole arms and, you know, spear their enemies as they're oncoming. They do have better armor than many on this list. They unfortunately do have an open face helmet, but it is one that doesn't leave a huge open face. It does cover a good portion of it, including the cheeks. Their shields are decent size, not as big as they could be, but alright. The biggest perk I have with these ones, actually there's 2. There's a lot of villages you can recruit from in the Stormlands, so you can build up an army of these bad boys fast. And most of them do use maces, which are much better in close quarters combat than swords in this game. So they are pretty devastating even on foot, but more so on horse when, you know, fighting most opponents, especially heavily armored ones, because the mace is far more effective against them. It was number 3, the Stormlands House Knight. Let's move on to number 2. So at number 2 we have the despicable Lannister soldiers themselves, the Red Cloak Knights. So this is the Westerlands' highest cavalry troop. And of course that's disregarding, like all these on the list, it's disregarding house troops, so no Lannister Knights here. But the Red Cloak Knights come in at number 2. They're a level 41 troop, so one of the highest in the game. And again, attributes and perks are all pretty much the same. Like the Sworn Swords from the Reach, they do take a negative effect for Power Strike and the other combat ones and Athletics because of how heavy their armor is, even though it doesn't look that heavy on the picture. It does offer great defense. Over here, you can see, much like the house guards for the Stormlands, these are specifically mounted knights, so they have a very high proficiency in one-handed weapons and pole arms. But with that in mind, let's jump into combat. So with the Red Cloak Knights, we have a few major benefits. For one thing, a lot of them get spawned with the banners, so they do have pole arms available. They've got long swords, which increase their reach. They have the best armored horses in the game, as you can see. Full coverage, there's not even weak spots by the neck, which does make them slower, but they're much harder to take down. They have large kite shields, which also helps. Their weakest points are, again, these are expensive and time-consuming to train. They do have a decent amount of villages that you can recruit them from, so it's not too bad to get the recruits. But they are very expensive. Their maintenance is 79 silver stags per week, making them one of, if not the most expensive units in the game to maintain. They do have a pretty high one-handed and pole arms proficiency, but because of their other low ones, their average combat proficiency is 130, putting it down pretty low. So they're really good in the open field on horseback, but not as good at besieging castles. But that's number 2, so let's go to the number 1 best heavy cavalry unit in Westeros. So at number 1, it should come as no surprise that we have the Vale Knights of the Gate. You know, the Vale being famous for their knights. So here we have a level 39 troop, so it's a lower level than the Westerlands ones, but it's also lower for the weekly wage, which is only 72 silver stags. Attributes and skills, as you should have expected by now, are about the same. However, the Vale Knights of the Gate do not suffer a power strike penalty like the other ones did. I don't know why, because they are wearing heavy plate armor. But these ones have the added benefit over the Westerlands, the Red Cloak Knights, of having a very high one-handed and pole arms proficiency, but also everything else being very high, including their two-handed, which is actually higher than the rest, as is their archery. So these are an extremely versatile troop. They're very, very good on horseback and open field, and also excellent at defending or assaulting castles. So let's see them in the open field. So as you can see, they have heavily armored horses, not as heavily as the Red Cloak Knights, but for that they are faster, and they have a little horn on the front, which I think does extra charging damage, so their charges can be devastating. They have nice long kite shields which cover basically their full body, and they also have thick plate armor, as I pointed out, and closed face helmets, which makes them much harder to kill, at least by archers, or, headshots with head hits with a sword. They're pretty fast, but they do have the one weakness that most of the high-end troops in this game have, which is they are expensive to maintain, and they take a long time to train up to this level. And unfortunately, like many of the other troops, or at least a couple of the other, like the North ones, they do not have many villages in the Vale where you can recruit, peasants or recruits or whatever and get them up to this level. So it does take a while to build up a significant army of them. But with that in mind, that is the best cavalry troop in the game. That would be the Vale Knights of the Gate. Well, that does it for this one. That was all of the best cavalry units from Westeros in A World of Ice and Fire, the mod for Mount Blade Warband. Like I said, I made this system as accurate as possible. In any case where there was a tie on anything, which only happened a few times, there was another factor that I would use to break that tie. And of course it would, still remain close in the list. But by using multiple different factors to judge which is the best, this should be the all-around best. Again, that was just for Westeros. I'll probably do another one for Essos later on. And of course I'll be doing more for the other troop types in the game. So if you like that, great. See you next time. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. If you did, I can assume you liked the content, and hopefully you'll subscribe and turn on the notification bell. If you haven't already, check out these links I have on the screen to see me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you like my content and would like to support what I do here, there's a link to my Patreon account in the description, and a donation would be much appreciated. In any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day.